It was springtime in England, springtime in Surrey, and the high road south from Guildford to Angles Green was aflutter with the stirrings of butterflies. Young birds flitted and swooped, or sat and chirped at their good fortune to be young, alive, and English. Bees buzzed, and if one listened hard enough, one could hear green buds and tender shoots sigh with delight in the somewhat warm wind. Two young men rode along the verge of the roadway to avoid the muddy spatters and deep ruts carved by winter traffic, and the creaking wagons and wains of the local farmers, the occasional flock of sheep being moved from one grazing to another. One young fellow was a countryman, tow-headed and sinewy on a middling hired mare, leading a pack-horse upon which were strapped a few travelling bags of cylindrical leather, or pouch-like carpet material. He was dressed in a sailor's slop trousers, shirt and neckerchief, and a low-crowned, flat-brimmed hat of black-tarred straw on the back of his head, and he gazed with a rustic's fondness on the verdant green countryside, recognizing merit and worth in well-tended flocks and fields, of trimmed hedgerows and woods. The other was revealed a gentleman by his better horse, by the fineness of his buff-coloured breeches and waistcoat, the newness of his plum-coloured coat and dark beaver-cocked hat, and the sheen of his top boots. This young gentleman snared the attention of passing travellers and the interest of the farm girls, whose sap was stirring after a long, miserable winter. There he found merit and worth. He was 3 inches shy of 6 feet tall, trim and lean. Hair of middle, almost light brown, crowned his head, and fell in a short queue at the back of his collar, bound with a bow of black satin, and the hair was not drawn back severely, but allowed to curl slightly and naturally at his temples over his ears, like the bust of a Roman or Greek warrior. The face was tanned much darker than most fashionable young gentlemen would care to display, providing a background for eyes that would occasionally crinkle in delightful greetings to young farm girls, eyes that were sometimes grey, sometimes blue, and upon one cheek there was a slight white pucker of a scar, which gave him the dashing rake-hell air of past and present danger. Soldier or sailor, most judged him. A young man who held the king's commission from his clothing and the way he bore himself, from his fine manners when he lifted his military-cut hat in greeting, from the effortless way he rode as if born to a house of means, with stables and the license of the hunt which did not come to the son of a crofter or tenant. Lieutenant Alan Lewrie, Royal Navy, was feeling pleased as punch with himself and with life in general at that moment. The spirited roan gelding he rode was a sound mount, and there was nothing better to his way of thinking than to be in the saddle in the middle of a spring morning. Had his father not practically press-ganged him into the sea service, he might have considered a career, a short one until he inherited, he reminded himself, in a cavalry regiment. What else was there for a younger son that befitted one raised the way he had been? Trade? A clerking job? Certainly not the clergy, he shuddered. Much as he had at first despised the life he had discovered in the fleet, and still looked upon with a chary eye as one of continual deprivation and bleakness, he had in his luggage orders that would put him in command of a ship of war, would transport him a quarter of the way around the world to the Bahamas and the West Indies for 3 years of steady pay at 5 shillings per diem to augment his prize money, his French guineas, and his Mindanao pirates' booty, all now safely ensconced in London at Coutts and Company, bankers, and each drawing a tidy sum of its own per annum. And the world, for once, was at peace. 90% of the fleet was laid up in ordinary, and there would be no round shot round his ears for a change. He did, good as he felt, admittedly suffer a tiny twinge of faintness from past experience whenever life tasted so succulently sweet. But it was a very tiny twinge, and it passed. He had been far to the west country, to Wheddon Cross in Devonshire, to visit his grandmother Lewrie, now a nut-bush, which stratagem by the old lady had saved the estate from his father's clutches, though to his cost. She had faded since his last visit in 1784, but was still among the living. though that mercifully could not be said of the dour old squinter-pipes she'd wed to transfer coverture and the inheritance out of Sir Hugo's reach. And now he was due at the Chiswick's estate, there to languish in a lotus-eater's paradise of sleeping late, riding to hounds, and splendid country dinners and dances, until he was due to report to Portsmouth to take command of a vessel named Alacrity. And on that Chiswick estate would be the lovely and charming Caroline Chiswick, who, by the evident fondness in her letters to him, was positively pawing the ground to see him once more. "What could be more perfect, Coney?" Alan laughed out loud as he turned to look over his shoulder at his man, Will Coney, who had shared his adventures and his misadventures since Yorktown. "'Deed it is a fair morning, sir," Coney enthused back, beaming a farm lad's pleasure to be in such fair country on such a fine morning. "And there's the squire's house round the bend, sir, not a league from the public house at Angles Green." "We'll stop for a pint. How's that suit you, Coney?" Lewrie promised. Then on to the Chiswicks. "Pint'd suit me right down to me toes, it would, sir." Will Coney agreed, kneeing his mare to match his master's quicker pace.